how Marquez started by talking about the non-justiciable rights, or some things that are there, and it's as if, well, it's just there in the layman's word, for being their sake, making people to ask truly, what are human rights? Now we're looking at, you mentioned civil and even political rights, and we know that irrespective of your race, color, you all should have that, and they say it is inherent in us. Now, if it is inherent in us, there's still abuse, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it that we don't know?
Well, it's a combination of factors. Well, ignorance is part of it, but again, the environment you also find yourself in, that's ignorance on the part of the people, and then ignorance on the part of the leadership. Because we live in Nigeria here, we live in a society where government sees delivering service to the people as a privilege, and not a right. So when the governor ties a road, he sees it as if he's doing a favor to the people. So it's, I think the ignorance is on two sides. It's on the side of the people. A lot of people don't know about these rights. So, and when you don't know about the rights, you really can't ask for it, and you can't enforce it. And then you also have a government that also does not even understand what the role of government is. Because these rights have been listed out in the Constitution. It is actually government's responsibility to enforce them.
Okay, now some people also say that our military era background also has a lot to do with what we expect, and the fact that we easily get contented, so to speak. And some people say, well, a host of things have changed. The media is free. You can say whatever it is you want to say without fear of harassment, but we should know the boundaries. Do you think that that background does have anything to do with it, or are we being impossible?
Well, like the question Suleiman raised, I think the part of the problem is ignorance, basically. But I know that a lot of things have changed. A lot has changed. I remember the last time I was here, we talked about Section 29(4)(b), and you saw how Nigerians reacted to it. The Sullivan Chime and his wife controversy also saw how people responded to it. So the awareness is growing.
So these are rights issues.
They are rights issues. So awareness is growing, but it hasn't grown to the extent where there will be pressure on government to deliver. But people are becoming aware. Most people now know that, okay, most women know basically that if they're abused, they can go to the police, for instance, or they have organizations they can run to and make complaints that I've been abused by my husband, or I've been abused by my brother, or whoever. But again, whether the police understands its role when those complaints are made is another entirely different. Whether the police is prepared to do or knows what it's supposed to do, it's an entirely different issue. But awareness is growing, but it hasn't really grown to the extent where we would see that the kind of change that we're looking forward to.
Okay, moving forward, how do we get that awareness to sink in? We talked about the institutions, we talked about the people, failure on both sides. So how do we get that awareness to sink in?
Well, I know that as civil society, civil society has done a lot in terms of creating awareness on some of these issues. But government also needs to play its part. I'm very happy with what Professor Chidi and the people he's working with at the National Human Rights Commission are doing. It's all part of creating awareness. So when people know that if you do certain things, like for example now the State Security Service now knows that if people are executed in circumstances that are not so very clear, that somebody is going to look into it. A neutral body that is relatively independent will look into it. Then I think it will help to not only create awareness amongst the people, but also get government to become more responsible. But
there also arises the question of standards, or will I say culture, for instance, because you talked about the death penalty. And it would seem that here in Nigeria, it's a pretty controversial one, because there are people who are for the death penalty and think that we haven't reached the stage where we say we will do away with the death penalty. That even in advanced democracies, for instance, in the United States, states are allowed to take what it is they would take and what it is they wouldn't take. So there is still some controversy as to what standards we're looking at. How do you think we can sort that out?
Well, yes, I think the challenge we've had in Nigeria is that we've really not done a reliable opinion poll as to how many Nigerians are for or against. But for me, I am against the death penalty, and my reasons are many. For starters, I think it's not working. If you've imposed the death penalty you've been applying the death penalty for 50 years and nothing has changed, I think you should start thinking about a different strategy. And then when you also look at the underlying philosophies behind the application of the death penalty, like deterrence, for example, and retribution, you see that when you look at it critically, you realize that it really doesn't add up. So for me, I am opposed to the death penalty, but I honestly think that we need to do a proper opinion poll to arrive at the conclusion that the majority of Nigerians actually are opposed to it. Because for me, if you apply a maybe a what do I call it? You've been applying a particular crime prevention strategy and it's not been working, then I think you have to rethink or rework it to find something that would work. For example, like I don't think it has stopped kidnapping in Edo State. It hasn't stopped in Bayelsa, that has imposed the death penalty. It hasn't stopped in Enugu and in Anambra, that also has the death penalty for kidnapping. So what's the point? And then again, you also have to ask yourself if we have a criminal justice system that has the capacity to process. Because when I mean processing, I'm talking about the ability of the police to apprehend, to investigate, and then to properly arraign, and then the capacity of the court also to deal with these crimes as well. Terrorism, for example, carries the death penalty. How many convictions have we had on terrorism, for example? So I think what we basically need to do is to rethink our criminal justice system and not just pander to the sentiments of the public, because it doesn't really help anybody.
Now, the reason I ask this is because you know that there is always an ongoing debate as to which system is working and why it's working. I mean, talk about democracy that is practiced in the West and all the type of, some sort of pseudo-democracy practice in the Far East, say in China, for instance. And, and the standards of the West, so to speak, versus other standards. And people are saying, well, why does it seem like as if somebody or one section of the world is trying to impose certain standards on other parts of the world? And I'm just wondering, where do we fit into all of this? Is that really a necessary debate, or is it that we too also have to figure out our own standards? Do we have to go back to our traditions to start looking for what we had then and what we can actually bring into our modern world?
Well, for me, I don't even think it's about another culture in trying to impose its own values or not. I am looking at it more like from the point of view of pragmatism. Is it working? And then sometimes people create the impression that some of these penal policies that we apply are Africa. How do I put it now? Is it that they are borrowed? But the reality on ground is that our own penal policy, our traditional penal policy, is actually more reconciliatory. So when somebody commits a crime, it's not. I don't think our forefathers had prisons and hanged people the way we hang people now. They didn't have those kind of things. So it's actually un-African. Some of the things we're actually doing now that we're holding on to firmly is actually un-African. So I don't think, even though we had in certain parts of Nigeria, pre-colonial Nigeria, we had the death penalty, but then it was applied with a lot of caution, not the way we do it here.